Welcome to Ask Sean, where I explore all sorts of questions about life, relationships, and being human. I'm Sean Slevin, a licensed professional counselor and a licensed marriage and family therapist. And if you have a question for me, you can send that to me anonymously at asksean.org. So in this video, I want to explore the difference between grieving, like a healthy grieving of something, versus kind of a whining or complaining. Now, this is maybe a little bit edgy. I don't know, a little bit edgy for my past self. I have a very tender heart, and so I care about people and their pain, and I don't want to pick on anybody and their suffering or anything like that. And so words like complaining or whining, they would have been a little bit taboo for me once upon a time. But there is a place for this language. Now, not in a shaming way. So I really want us to examine this actually. And what are the ways in which you might have moments of being tempted into more of a complaining or whining kind of state? And what are the implications of that? How does that actually keep us stuck as opposed to helping us move through? Because this can be really powerful. Like, part of how I started to clue in on this was it was a combination of things I was experiencing with some clients and things it was coming up in my own work and my own therapy as a client. And so I discovered that there are ways that we can have an emotionality to us and be talking about something hard and stuff that matters, right? Stuff that we do need compassion for, and yet doing it in actually a bit of a disconnected way. And so we actually are blocking the very thing that would help us, like unconsciously. We don't realize we're doing this, right? Like so many things, we're just kind of, we're surviving, we're coping, So I noticed this as I was becoming more aware of it myself. It started to help me to understand certain kinds of challenging moments and confusing moments that I would have maybe with, certain clients, or sometimes with like friends even, where somebody would have some energy that they're bringing, some emotional energy. There's some emotionality. There might even be tears. There's some intensity. But the confusing thing is I would be finding myself being like, why do I not feel more sort of drawn to come in and comfort them? Like, why am I not? Because I'm very empathetic, and so when somebody's really dipping into their emotion, into a vulnerable place, I might get tears might come to my eyes, not in an overwhelmed way, but just I'm feeling their pain. I'm right there with them. And so it was perplexing to me for a long time of like, why are there some moments where that doesn't happen? And, one question that one aspect of that is like, well, is there something going on with me? Like, am I disconnected? Am I distracted? Am I just like exhausted and I don't have any more emotional bandwidth? And those would be all real possibilities. But I was consistently finding, like, when I would examine, is like, it doesn't feel, none of that quite fits. None of that felt like was the thing at play. Because it might even be like in the same day. I might like have a session like that, and then turn around and immediately have a session where it's like, oh yeah, like I'm right here, and and I'm feeling with them, and all of that. And so it's like I have the bandwidth. So why isn't a deeper connection happening in these moments? And so I got clued into sort of like kind of the solving this mystery in my own therapy as a client, in these places where I could get really intense and really angsty, and my therapist really wisely and kindly helped me start to recognize that something in me actually kind of was more interested in sort of being in that misery than I was in actually taking in being cared for, like receiving compassion and care and nurture and support. So this is a humbling thing, right? Because we all like to think, especially when we are in these kinds of places, when we're in a whining state, a complaining kind of state of being, like, we are taking responsibility is not something we want to do. like that's the nature of the state. It's very much, it's a bit of like a, even if we've never been spoiled in our background, it has a bit of like a entitled, spoiled, demanding child quality to it. Like, Like, and they're so mean and it's so unfair, and you'll never understand and it's always going to be terrible. And it's like, I mean, it's got that kind of energy to it. And there's a sense in which we don't actually want to be consoled. Like for me, a really big aspect of this that drove this a long time is that if I let myself be consoled, like then, like it felt like I'm letting the people who hurt me off the hook, which isn't actually true, but it felt that way. It's like I wanted to stay miserable because I didn't. It's not just letting them off the hook. It's like if I stay miserable, I'm holding on to that. If I can be miserable enough, if I can just be upset enough, somehow they'll see, and I'll make them see, and I'll make them get it. And so I didn't. So it's not even about letting them off the hook in terms of accountability. It's letting go of not the longing. It's letting go of the fantasy that I can make them get me, that I could make them understand my pain. The longing, we still need to have the longing. The longing is really important. We don't get rid of the longing, but there is this childish fantasy, and I don't mean childish in like a judgment way, but just in a descriptive way. It's developmentally childish. It's developmentally simple. This childish fantasy that if I can throw enough of a fit, if I can be upset enough, if I can complain enough, I can whine enough, maybe these people who are really important to me will understand and finally see how they hurt me and make amends, like, and really meet me in that. The problem is, by holding on to that, by sort of demanding that in this childish way, I block real connection when it is present. So like my therapist or like friends who are trying to be with me in my pain, I will block that because what I'm holding on to is not that, oh, I could have real compassion now. What I'm holding on to is I can, unconsciously, but I can kind of manipulate and coerce these people who hurt me into them like understanding and having empathy and apologizing. And so in order for that agenda to keep working, continuing, I have to be miserable. I have to stay upset. I have to block like any attempts by people to comfort me. Now, I do want to clarify, there are unhealthy attempts to comfort where it's just trying to make the pain go away, and that's not real comfort, right? But that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about people who are showing up and they're offering real connection. Like they will be with me in the pain. The problem is I'm not being with me in the pain. When we are whining, when we are complaining, we are not being with our pain. It's really fascinating. It's such an interesting dynamic that we can do this. We can have a lot of emotionality. We can have tears. We could have wailing, right? But we're actually blocking ourselves and others from accessing the really raw, sensitive part. Because if I move towards that, if I admit that that's there, I'm also having to acknowledge that these people who hurt me, like hurt me in those ways, that they may not be coming, that they may never show up. They may never get it. They may never come back. And that feels unbearable, and I don't want to face that. And so I'm going to keep that sort of sectioned off, and I'm going to hang out here really on the surface. I mean, frankly, in terms of emotional vulnerability, it's like talking about the weather. And which is really perplexing because, again, there can be so much emotionality to it. We can have this like intense emotionality of like, oh, and they did this and they did that and da-da-da. And we're describing things that do matter. They're real things, right? And there's real pain under the surface, but I'm not actually feeling the pain. I'm almost acting it out. Like we don't know that we're doing this in the moment, right? Like it's an unconscious thing, but I'm acting it out. That's where it's like talking about the weather. It's like, I'm not actually fully being present to it, which is why then I can't receive connection because I'm not connected. I won't connect with myself. I'm still abandoning those painful places. And I'm talking about them of like, yeah, there's this really hurt parts inside of me. I'm not saying it that directly, right? But it's like, yeah, and there's going to be some rain here and some da-da-da-da-da. And like, and isn't that awful? Blah, blah, blah. And it's like you can't have emotional connection there, right? Like, because it's like, it's so disconnected. It's disassociated, to use a technical term. So this is a really this was a game changer for me personally, and it was also it was a game changer in terms of how I work with clients, because I've developed then the ability to very skillfully call attention to that, not in a mean way, not in a like stop your whine and suck it up, like, but in a like really inviting people to actually connect with the real pain, and so helping them start to see like, you're talking about like some really, really hard, awful things here, but I don't actually feel like your heart here in the room. Like, I'm kind of wondering where you are. Like, I sort of feel like your digital avatar is here almost, right? Like, but I don't feel your heartbeat. Um, like, what was it like when that person said that? Like, what was it really like? Like, yeah, I hear all of this, but I want to feel you. Like, can we go there? Can we be with that? And that can be really scary, right, for each of us, When someone actually shows up with real connection, the thing that we long for, but also the thing that we kind of are choosing to reject because it's like, well, it's not in line with my agenda, my unconscious agenda to kind of, coerce or punish the people who hurt me, through my own suffering, which, again, not a great plan, but again, that's part of what makes it childish, right? Like I'm gonna gonna hold my breath as long as I can to punish you. And it's like, I'm literally depriving myself of oxygen. I'm literally depriving myself of what I need to live. I mean, it's a great example, actually. That just came to me. But that whole thing that we can sometimes do as children, I'm going to hold my breath as a way of trying to punish, a way of trying to coerce, trying to manipulate, right? And a good parent is going to be like, oh, sweetie, oh, buddy, I know you're so upset. We're still not going to do the thing, or you still have to, blah, 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 because, whatever, you broke the rule. But I love you, and I will always love you. And if you want to hold your breath, you can hold your breath. That's all right. But we're still not changing XYZ or whatever, right? Like the parent stays present, they stay connected, or maybe if there's something where the parent screwed up, the parent's like, I am so sorry, I missed that. I am so sorry. Holding your breath isn't going to actually get you what you need. I think you need a hug. Like, can I give you a hug? Like, I think you're really sad. I think underneath that anger, you're really sad. Like, that's what we need. We need help dropping into the actual sadness, actually being with the grief. Because real grieving is going to have a connected kind of quality to it. It's going to have this softness to it. It's going to have, even in the midst of intensity. I mean, like I've referenced this before. I mean, I've had seasons in my life where I have wept and I have wailed. I mean, literally lying on the floor, weeping and wailing and sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. But there's a difference between when I'm able to do that in a connected way, where I'm still present, I'm with it. It's intense, it's really hard, it can feel like dying, but I'm still with it, right? I'm not disassociating, I'm not shaming myself, and I feel some kind of presence. I feel my own presence. I feel some kind of connection to that there are people who exist in the world who love me. Even in feelings that can be of intense loneliness, intense abandonment that I've had in my life, abandonment and betrayal. So yeah, this is a really powerful, but kind of also advanced thing. I guess I feel like is like learning how to distinguish: am I really grieving, or am I just whining? Am I just complaining? And a way of, I mean, it's sort of, it's hard to describe all this, so I hope I'm giving you a bit of a feel of these two categories. But some of the ways to try to parse that out is to ask, like, am I able to allow anyone to be with me in this? And, actually, just even asking that question might be revealing, because if you immediately have a response inside of you of like, well, no, because nobody can get this and da-da-da, that's a high probability that you're in, at least partly in, a bit of a complaining, whining, kind of self-imposed misery. because part of that state of being, that kind of misery, is this feeling of, I feel terrible, and I'm not going to allow for anyone to convince me otherwise, because, again, of my agenda to coerce, to manipulate unconsciously, right? Get revenge on the people who hurt me. Like, I'm still very tied to whoever I felt hurt by. And if I somehow allow for comfort, if I allow for good, then I'm letting go of my goal of getting back at them, which is hard to let go of. Very hard to let go of. Letting go of, like, making them see me, right? And yet, it doesn't work to make people try to see us. It doesn't work to try to make people love us, to make people apologize. It doesn't work to try to punish them by punishing ourselves. Like, it just doesn't. It is a 0% success rate. Not saying that we can't, sometimes influence people behaviorally, but it's not real connection. It's not a real result, right? Like, and so the worst thing, honestly, for any of us is, like, to have any experience where it felt like, oh, that kind of worked, I'm going to do more of that. like that's terrible. That just reinforces this fantasy. And then we're moving further and further. It's like the child that keeps holding the breath. It's like, well, I'm going to hold my breath even longer now because that kind of worked a little bit. I'm going to hold it even longer and even longer. And it's like, well, eventually you die from lack of oxygen, from lack of, like, you have to breathe. And we can kind of die emotionally, psychologically, spiritually from lack of connection. We keep cutting ourselves off. So yeah, this question of, can I allow anyone to actually be with me in just how much this hurts, whatever the hurt is, the betrayal, the loss, the shame, the pain, like, can I allow someone? And then sort of, kind of a next sort of step is, like, finding someone to test that out with, so therapist, mentor, spiritual leader, family member, friend. And maybe even, depending on how bold you want to be, maybe we can straight up tell them, like, hey, I'm trying to figure out if I'm actually grieving or if I'm kind of just whining. Like, I know there's real pain in me, right? Because that's the thing. Like, whining doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from somewhere. So if we're whining, there is pain under there. It's just the whining and the complaining is blocking us from actually being with the deeper, more real, more tender pain. So it's like, that's a real, I guess, one thing I'm being real clear about. Like, whining and complaining isn't making up something, right? It's not. It is a bit of there's a fakeness to whining and complaining because it's blocking connection, but it is tied to real things, right? There is some kind of real pain in there. Otherwise, I wouldn't keep holding on to trying to, get people to get it or whatever, or getting back at them in some, again, this childish way. So there's real pain there. So, we can go to somebody and say, hey, I'm trying to figure out, I'm like, I've got this. I know I have intense emotions about this, but can I try to tell you about, like, what happened? And I want to see if I can let in your care. Cause I want to believe that, that people can care about me and that I can experience that. Now, for most of us, we're probably not going to be that direct. Like, in some ways, that's a pretty advanced conversation. So maybe more realistically, you just go to somebody and say, hey, can I tell you about what happened with this thing? And then just pay attention to, as they respond with compassion, do you let that in? Like, or do you leave some of that on your front door, and, like, not actually letting it into your home? You leave it, setting it out on the front porch, to waste it, just sort of blow away with the wind or whatever, or get eaten by the bugs. Like, think about, like, somebody dropping off a care package of food. Like, do you take it in and eat it and be nourished by it? Or do you block some of it? Because the reality is, we all block the good to some degree. And the goal in life is to get more skilled and recognizing the places where we block the good, and to then do the healing we need to do so that we can actually take in the good. Because here's the interesting thing about the world. The world is really fucked up, but it also is way more beautiful and bountiful and kind and generous and nourishing and fun and safe than any of us ever imagined. And that is not taking away from the fact that the world is also brutal and horrible and unsafe and all sorts of things, right? But as we work with these ways that we block the good, that we block nourishment, these ways that we just hang out in whining, and hang out in complaining, hang out in our self-imposed misery that is connected to real pain, but blocks us from being with the real pain. As we hang out in those places, we are cutting ourselves off from so much good that is in the world. And so we're just going to focus on like what is horrible. And because it's been fascinating to me that like, it's not that the world has become a better place as I've grown and healed. It's like, no, I'm still very connected to all the awfulness. I mean, it's like shows up every day in my office, right? Like people bring horrible things that they have experienced, and I am with them in it, and I'm really with them in it. Like I don't pull back. And I still have stuff in my own past that I'm healing, right? Like there's always more things, and and then things in the present, right? Like I've got some things in the past few weeks where like I've felt hurt and disappointed with some people, and I maybe have hurt or disappointed people too, right? It's like it's always both, right? Like so it's like all of that is still true, and I have been astounded by just the amazing buffet of nourishment and goodness and beauty that has been all around me the whole time, but that I wouldn't let myself see, I wouldn't let myself partake in, I wouldn't let myself drink it in. And so like we need this, we need goodness, we need nourishment, we need connection, we need beauty. Precisely because life is fucking hard, y'all. Like it is really difficult being human. It is really difficult. Like I mean, it's amazing the human race is still here. Aside from the fact that like, it's amazing we haven't wiped ourselves out, again and again and again. But also just, I mean, it's just relationships are hard. Like it's hard, like attending to all our stuff, just, tending to daily life, right? The challenges of adulting, all these kinds of things, Like it is really hard, but it also is so beautiful. It is so, so beautiful. And so we need to be able to actually be connected to the beauty and the goodness and be able to drink that in. It's like, I need every drop that I can get, like to so that we can actually want to be here and not just distract ourselves away, not get to the end of our life and be like, and look at our phone and be like, oh, I spent 65% of my life wasting away on YouTube and Instagram. Wow, that is not a life well lived. And there are good uses of Instagram and YouTube. I mean, you're going to be watching this on YouTube, right? Like, it's like these platforms aren't inherently evil, although they can be problematic in certain ways, right? But it's like, I don't want to be distracting my life away. If I'm going to be on Instagram or be on YouTube, I want it to be with purpose, right? I want it to be from an awake place, not from I can't bear my life right now. And so rather than cultivating the ability to actually take in the nourishment that is available to me and the world around me and the people around me, like I'm going to just distract myself and self-abandon. Like, again, not a good plan. It's like, that's just another form of holding our breath, it is developmentally childish. And we are capable of so much more. It is hard. I want to acknowledge it is so hard. Oh man. I just did not want to let go of some of these things. Like there was such a sorrow there for me of admitting, just thinking of one example in particular at the moment, one of many, like, okay, this person's never going to get it. They're never going to really feel and understand what they did to me and how they hurt me. And the little boy in me just has cried and cried and cried and cried and cried about that. I mean, I can still feel it brings up emotion right now. What I've learned to do is to really turn towards him and hold him and hold him and hold him and let him cry as many times as he needs to, as long as he needs to, and being honest with him of like, buddy, they're not coming. I'm so sorry. I'm so, so sorry for what they did, but they're not coming. We can't keep waiting. Like, you're starving here, waiting for them. And it's just like, oh, it is so sad. It is so sad for those parts of us that just long for various people in our history to finally get it, to finally come, to finally get our pain, right? But sort of holding out in this fantasy way, you know, and blocking ourselves from actually being with the pain, like it keeps us stuck. So ironically, as I've done this work, I actually am able to receive the little bits of good that I'm thinking about, like this one example. Like, I've actually had some meaningful and healing conversations with this person, but they're not the conversations that I was like holding out in a fantasy way for. Those conversations aren't going to happen. But there is little bits of good that has been able to happen, and I'm open to that, and I can receive that in part because I've let go of the childish fantasy that, like, oh, I can make them get the fullness, right? And like, do I deserve to be gotten in the fullness? Well, yeah, we all do, right? And it's not okay, you know, that person isn't going to, that they can't, that they're not willing to do the hard work, all those kinds of things. And yet at the same time, I am okay. I am okay. Currently, I'm going to be okay because I have, by letting go of the fantasy, I can let in the good that is. By letting go of what won't be, most likely, and being honest about what currently is, of like, you know, okay, this is terribly disappointing, to put it mildly, but it's what is, right? This person has not shown up, and they've consistently not shown up in certain ways. And there's no indication that they're going to be able to. There's no like progression that this is remotely within reach. And so being honest, brutally honest with myself about that, dropping down underneath the whining and complaining, actually entering into the grief and the sorrow of that, and grieving and letting go and letting go and letting go, and then grabbing hold again and letting go and grabbing hold again and letting go and letting go. I'm actually able to receive, when there is a little bit of good, genuine good, I can catch it and be like, oh, well, that was really nice. It's like little microscopic thing, right? Like I would wish for and have needed from this person like so much more. But because I've faced that isn't coming, I can actually enjoy the little bit of good that is. That's not in a letting them off the hook in terms of like, no, I mean, they're still accountable for their choices. Like, I still have boundaries with them, right? Like, I had something like with this one person not too long ago where it's like, hey, you know, you did this thing that you keep doing. And like, so like, I'm not going to do X, Y, Z when you're just going to blah, blah, blah. Like, that's not cool. Like, so we need to have a conversation about that. But I was able to do it from this very grounded adult place and not from the child place of like, why have you been terrible to me again? You know, because again, I've been being with that deeper pain over and over and grieving it and grieving it and grieving it, as opposed to just hanging out in sort of that self-imposed misery of the whining, of the complaining. So this is my invitation to you. This is your life's invitation to you, to all of us, is to really try to notice, try to catch, where am I blocking connection? Where am I just kind of whining? Where am I whining about my pain, about my suffering, about my hurt? Where am I just complaining? Where am I being angsty? I kind of love that word. I have a lot of angsty, a lot of practice being angsty. You know, where am I not actually dropping in? Where am I afraid to drop in to those more sensitive places? Where am I afraid to admit maybe that person isn't going to come around? And I so have wanted them to. Oh, I still want them to. So this is the thing. You don't have to let go of the want. The want can, you know, we need the want. Stay with the want. But we need to be honest about, like, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. You know, especially in some of these places where it's like, there's a long, clear pattern. I don't think they're coming. And my whining and complaining and being angsty, it's just hurting me, and it's keeping me stuck, and it's leaving that little boy in me. It's leaving that hurt part of me, whatever age, right? Leaving him stuck. It's leaving that part of you, little boy, a little girl in you, leaving them stuck. Like, don't leave them back there alone. Like, they need you. They need the nourishment and love of the people who are in your life now. Because there probably are some people who do love you, no matter how hard your life is. Like, there are little bits of goodness around us. Sometimes it's microscopic, right? Sometimes it's just, the person in the checkout line who's friendly, or somebody who holds the door for us, or just a kind acknowledgement as we're walking down the street. But there is all these little bits of goodness from our fellow humans and from the world around us, the beauty of creation. And so, yeah, I know it's hard. I really do know it's hard. It's not an easy process, and you will need help. You need to find somebody, someone like me, a counselor, a mentor, spiritual director or something, someone who has done this kind of work, who can really be with you in it, who's not afraid of the places that you're afraid to go, and can keep gently bringing you back to, but where's the pain underneath the angst and the whining and the complaining? Let's go to that grief together. Yeah. Well, until next time, peace be with you.